Welcome to Justice Trek. My name is Ted Kilvington, and this is an audio and video log that journeys through comic book history as I discuss individual comic book stories of Star Trek, the Justice Society, and the world's greatest superheroes, the Justice League of America. Justice Trek is the only show devoted to the entirety of these great comic book series, from the 1940 debut of the JSA, the launch of the JLA and Star Trek comic books in the 1960s, and right up to comics hot off today's shelves. This show will impact you in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hey everyone, I'm Ted Kilvington. Welcome to Justice Trek. This is episode 22, where I will be talking about 2022 Star Trek number 2 from IDW and number 3 as well. If you missed our previous coverage of IDW Star Trek comics, just a quick recap. Last fall of 2022, they relaunched their numbering of Star Trek series with a brand new first issue, and rather than focus on any one TV show, whether original series or Next Generation or Deep Space Nine or the films or what have you, they wanted to focus on many characters from many series. So they put them all into one giant, thought-provoking, exciting, gripping adventure, and so I'm really eager to talk about it with you. Also available for your viewing and listening pleasure are previous episodes of Justice Trek, such as episode 20, where I covered Star Trek number 1, and episode 21, where I covered 2022's Justice Society of America number 1, and 2022's Stargirl, The Lost Children number 1. So I first read these comics, actually I didn't get to them last fall. I was originally planning on waiting for the trade, and then someone else said, wow, these comics are great, you really got to check them out. So in March, I ended up not waiting for the trade, and I went down to the nearest comic book shop, which is actually like 14 miles from my house, and picked them up there. Brought them home, read them, loved them, and decided that I got to talk about it on this show. So if you are enjoying my coverage of IDW Star Trek, please click like, please click subscribe. Let's get on with the show. Now, in 2022's Star Trek Klingons, which was reprinted in this Star Trek Aliens trade paperback, writers Jackson Lanzing and Collin Kelly told about how Kahless founded the Klingon Emperor, which has been divided into several factions and were visited by at least one alien race that had been worshipped as gods. Now, in 2022's Star Trek number 400, Kelly and Lanzing told us about the death of Gary Mitchell, a former Starfleet officer who had achieved higher metaphysical and mental abilities before being mysteriously obliterated. And in 2022, Star Trek number 1, Kelly and Lanzing told us how, in the year 2379, the Bajoran prophets were worried about a danger to powerfully metaphysical beings such as themselves. So they sent Ben Sisko back to his original plane of existence to thwart the danger. When Sisko returned, he talked Starfleet into giving him command of the experimental vessel, the USS Theseus, so he could carry out his directive from the prophets. Shortly after the Theseus departed, they encountered the super-physical species known as the crystalline entities, only to see them, too, obliterated. Brief roll call. These characters have already appeared in the first issue of this run of Star Trek. That's Captain Benjamin Sisko, Commander Dr. Beverly Crusher, Commander Data, Ensign Lily Sato, Lieutenant Tom Paris, Ensign Talir, Captain Montgomery Scott, And making their debut in IDW Star Trek Volume 2 is Ambassador Worf, created by Gene Roddenberry and Dorothy C. Fontana. First appearance in Star Trek The Next Generation, Series 1, Episode 1, or Season 1, Episode 1, which the episode was titled Encounter at Farpoint and aired on September 18th, 1987. Worf is a Klingon who was raised by humans before he joined Starfleet. Worf served aboard the USS Enterprise D and Enterprise E, along with Dr. Crusher and Mr. Data. He later served aboard Deep Space Nine with Captain Sisko during the Dominion War, before becoming the Federation ambassador to Konos, the Klingon homeworld. Star Trek number 2 was published November 30th, 2022 with a $4.99 cover price. The untitled story was 24 pages long, written by Collin Kelly and Jackson Lanzing. Oleg Chudakov was the pencil and ink artist. Lee Lowridge was the color artist. Clayton Cowles was the letterer. Neil Uyatake was the design and production. Heather Antos was the senior editor, and Vanessa Real was the editorial assistant. The opening text is, by the 24th century, humanity has spread among the stars. We have formed a united federation of planets with like-minded worlds and formed a star fleet to explore the final frontier. Out there, we have found many species like ours, and even more still in the evolutionary cradle. But every so often, we discover a species so far advanced that we might as well call them gods. Captain Benjamin Sisko has, for 3 years, been abducted by one such species. Days ago, he returned with a mission. Someone is killing the gods, and only Starfleet's best can hope to stop it. Captain's log, stardate 55310.2. The prophets have spoken through action and circumstance. I can't help but hear their warning in the shattered crystal fields of the Hephaestus Nebula. The crystalline entities are dead. Genocide in a single shot. The Theseus and her crew followed me into this mission on blind faith, but every day the knowledge imparted to me in the wormhole fades, and I am left with fewer and fewer answers for the scientists and explorers who make up this crew. They know the threat is real, but they're not as certain about the man who brought it to them. Deep Space Nine was a family, but these people, they're skeptics. At best, they're a means to an end. At worst, they're a panopticon. Fortunately, what little evidence we have as to the mystery attacker has led us to a man whom I will forever consider my brother. Captain Sisko walks across the red lands of the Klingon homeworld of Konos, where he encounters his old comrade-in-arms, Ambassador Worf. Their meeting is in the extinct volcano Korok, where Emperor Kahless the Unforgettable founded the Klingon Empire 1,500 years before. The landing party from the Theseus, which includes Ensign Sato and Lieutenant Paris, enter the throne room of the capital to meet the new Emperor of the Klingon Empire. It is Kahless. Recently, in response to corrupt government leaders, the Klingons decided to clone their legendary leader and have him sit on the throne. Although the Emperor was to be a mostly ceremonial position, recent governmental vacancies have caused many leadership responsibilities to be assumed by Kahless II. The Starfleet delegation, as translated by Lily, who speaks Klingon, tells the Emperor that they are searching for a heinous criminal who has destroyed countless alien life forms, and they are requesting the Empire's assistance. Specifically, they ask to speak to the Klingon engineers known as the Shapers at Sarkadesh. The Emperor tells them no. They ask again, but the Emperor again declines. Sisko contacts the Theseus and tells them to prepare to depart for Sarkadesh anyway. Sisko and Worf then have a private conversation. Worf tells Sisko that the Emperor's patience has been growing thinner and that he, Worf, tires of the tedium of an ambassador's duties. Sisko asks Worf to come with him. Captain's log, supplemental. On my order and with Ambassador Worf aboard, the Theseus has broken the Klingon quarantine that surrounds the mysterious planet of Sarkadesh. I am well aware that the eyes of the crew are on me. I know I am one wrong move from losing what little trust they have in my admittedly dangerous plan. But I can feel it in my bones. The threat, the unraveling of space and time that will follow from our quarry's crusade, and I will not allow it. The Theseus reaches Sarkadesh, which is a rogue planet within an artificial star system. Sisko, Data, Lily, and Dr. Crusher beam down, leaving Worf in command. The Shapers accuse the landing party of breaking their agreement, but Sisko assures them that they are not the ones who broke any agreement with them. Meanwhile, a group of 10 Klingon warships appear in space and demand that Worf be put under arrest. Worf has the ship execute evasive maneuvers while bluffing the Klingon ships by overloading an environmental compensation system so that it registers as an immense power surge to the Klingons. The bluff is successful, and the Klingon ships back off. Back on Sarkadesh, Sisko tells the Shapers that he is on a mission from the prophets to save lives, but the Shapers say they do not care about the lives of lesser beings. Data persuades the Shapers that they are not lesser beings, because he himself is superior, and since he was made by a human, then the humans must also be superior. The Shapers accept that claim, and then answer the landing party's questions. The ship that broke the peace was equipped with a weapon of incredible power, capable of striking fear even into the hearts of the Shapers. They were told Sarkadesh would be destroyed if they did not cooperate. And by cooperate, that meant building a weapon capable of destroying higher civilizations. Worf then asks Sisko that he be reinstated as a Starfleet officer. Sisko accepts. The captain then reveals that they were given one final clue from the Shapers: a bloodied Klingon dagger. Okay, IDW does a lot of covers for their Star Trek comics. So cover A was by Ramon Rosales, pencil and ink art, and he also did the interior artwork and a cover version for Star Trek #1. Lee Lowridge did the color art for cover A. The image shows someone cutting their hand with a Klingon dagger. It represents a scene in the story where it was said that people must shed their blood before entering the presence of Kahless. The image was a little disappointing. We don't see who was shedding their own blood, and faces really help sell a feeling. Cover B was by Makai Ward, pencil, ink, and color art. This is the first in a series of variants, with each one showing the head of a Theseus crew member against a psychedelic background. This time, it is Data. Not bad, but it has nothing to do with the story, and like cover A, does not seem to have any feeling behind it. Cover C was by J.K. Woodward, pencil, ink, and color art. This version shows Captain Sisko shaking hands with Ambassador Worf. Once again, we have an image that is underwhelming. Sisko is expressionless, but Worf does seem to have a small smile, and at least it is representative of the story. Cover D was a colorless version of color A. There was a retailer's incentive variant cover by Christian Ward, pencil, ink, and color art. Now this one is my favorite. It has nothing to do with the story. But the image of Sisko with a stern look on his face as he points a phaser while being teleported is the essence of Trek. And finally, there is a Virgin variant version of the retailer's incentive cover. Okay, moving on to the interiors. The inside front cover has a brief recap that I mentioned earlier before the synopsis. Now, between the background info I provided, the recap, and the captain's log, I hope you viewers had enough information to understand what was going on in this issue. Or at least what went on before this issue. And then the synopsis would tell you what happened in the issue. Page 1. We see Sisko kneeling in a robe. Then we see him in uniform in his captain's chair. Then we see him eyeballing Data. Then we see him smiling as he walks on Kronos. The images are disjointed, seeming like random illustrations to accompany the captain's log. Page 2. Sisko reuniting with Worf. The scenes on Kronos are drenched in reddish hues, even more so than the scenes set in the same location in the Star Trek Klingons one-shot. Page 3. I am so glad that I read that one-shot. It really provided a great backstory to not only Kahless and the rest of the Klingons, but to the Kolok crater specifically. You can see a glimpse of the three-turn bridge that inspired the Klingon symbol. Page 4. A full-page image of Kahless II on the throne. Images like this are supposed to be impressive, but we see too much of the throne and not enough of the warrior sitting on it. Page 5. A text page explaining the turmoil in Klingon government and the restoration of the Kahless clone to the Imperial throne. Page 6. Lily goes in more detail than I mentioned in my synopsis when making her team's case to Kahless. Page 7. On this page, Sisko makes his plea to Kahless in English. Page 8. There are some differences between the way Kahless was drawn in the Star Trek Klingons one-shot by Timothy Green II and the way his clone is drawn here by Oleg Chudakov. Now, some differences, of course, could be explained simply by the different environments in which they were raised/developed. I mean, you take a clone of a person from 1500 years ago and you raise them in modern human society. Well, the difference in the life they have to live, nutrition, the quality of mattresses, affecting their spine, those will have a big effect on the way a person's body develops. So, on the other hand, those ridges in the Star Trek Klingons one-shot were meant to be distinctive, with each Klingon having slightly different ridges on their forehead to distinguish them from each other. And that's primarily what I'm talking about when I say that there are differences. On page 9, Data tries to talk Sisko out of violating the command of Kahless II by going to the Shapers of Sarkadesh, but Sisko says that preventing genocide is more important. I would have to agree with Captain Sisko on this one. Page 10. The private conversation between Worf and Sisko takes place in Worf's ambassador office. Now, in my day job, I'm a government employee, and I can confirm that I would much rather be out of the office than in the office. Page 11. This page has Sisko's second log entry. The two images here are more fitting than the images accompanying the log entry on page 1. On page 12, we have a text page excerpt from the Klingon Defense Force Tactical and Historical Saga about Sarkadesh. It is a poem. Now, hopefully I can do my Klingon intonation without wrecking my vocal cords. We sing of Sarkadesh unconquered, the sun and world that should not be. How ancient swords thought that world theirs, and from the blood was shaped a sea. Through floods of war did Shapers rend, and gaze unfazed at Klingon pride. Through Hork and Gorn, all deeply bowed, the Shapers stood and only sighed. Begone, you things of meat and bone, and know that you are mortal still, for Sarkadesh is holy ground, and we are gods you cannot kill. We sing of Sarkadesh untouched, where miracles unman the brave, where Klingon boots may never tread, lest from empire they shape a grave. Oh. Page 13. On the bridge of the Theseus, the team prepares to go to Sarkadesh. Sisko has the landing party beamed directly from the bridge, and he is sitting down when doing so. I don't recall ever seeing someone being beamed from a sitting position, since they would arrive in the same position, and presumably he would need to be standing when he landed. I just thought that was odd. Now, on pages 14 and 15, we have a 2-page spread showing us our first glimpse of the Shapers. They are more than mortal, but less than gods, which is good for them since someone is killing gods. I love their species design, floating with luminescent tentacles instead of legs and feet. Page 16. When Worf is told that he is under arrest, he replies, "Arrest! You wield regulations like a Ferengi. It is no surprise the Emperor has assigned you to this Gehmachpuk," which means assigned you to this job for children. Page 17. When the Shapers say, "What care we for lives?" the ground beneath the landing party quakes. I guess it helps that the Shapers can float above the ground. Pages 18 and 19, we have another 2-page spread, this time showing the Theseus evading the Klingon ships. The use of space is good as it helps to convey the impact of the battle. In the comic images, you definitely, it's one of the advantages that they have over some other mediums, is that the size of the image is variable. If you're watching, say, a video on YouTube, they may focus in and out, but the size of your screen is almost unchanged. Whereas in the comics, the way they can expand it, to me, is a very effective use of the potential of the medium, and one of the things that makes comics stand out from other types of storytelling. On page 20, now, most of the issue, we only hear Scotty over the intercom. But here we get a brief glimpse of him. I like how he is well experienced with the concept of bluffing after having worked with Jim Kirk for decades. On page 21, I like how the Shapers see themselves as superior to not only humans, but also to the Bajoran prophets. It is surprising that a race as powerful as them could be intimidated into building a weapon that would destroy even themselves. Hey, you gods, build us a god-killing weapon, or we'll hurt you. It would seem, if somebody pointed a gun to my head and said, "Build me an even bigger gun, or I'll kill you," I'm like, well, what's to stop you from killing me with a bigger gun? Page 22. Data's logic is spurious, and I find it unlikely that the Shapers would buy his argument, but they fell for the threat of god killers, so they may not be as smart or as wise as they purport to be. On page 23, this is mostly an exposition page summing up the story we just read, but it's not a bad summary. And on page 24, and this too is an exposition page, in this case, setting us up for the next issue story. In summation, I thought Oleg Chudakov did an adequate job as artist, but I prefer the art of Ramon Rosanas, who did the first issue. All right, let's take a break. I'm going to show the credits. I like to show them in the middle. When we come back, I'll do my coverage of Star Trek number 3. Stick around. If you have questions or comments, please feel free to send them to me on Twitter under the handle @JusticeTrek. or via email at thejusticetrek@gmail.com. Be sure to include the word "the" at the beginning of the email address. For research purposes, I rely heavily on dc.fandom.com, memory-alpha.fandom.com, comicvine.gamespot.com, the Grand Comics Database at comics.org, and Mike Boyle's website, Mike's Amazing World of DC Comics at dcindexes.com. The opinions expressed are solely those of the host and any participants. This podcast is not a commercial enterprise and does not make any money. All copyrights are held by their respective owners. The opening sequence was animated by Craig Smith of Phoenix Studios. The opening music is Dragon Slayer by the Makai Symphony. All music used is either public domain and/or not protected by copyright. Under Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976, allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comments, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use.
Hey, welcome back. Thanks for being here. So, Star Trek number 3 was published on January 4th, 2023, with a $4.99 cover price. The untitled story was 24 pages long. It was by Collin Kelly and Jackson Lanzing writers, Ramon Rosanas pencil and ink artist, pages 1 and 24 only. Joe Eisma, pencil and ink artist, pages 3 through 10 and 12 through 23. There was no art on page 11. Lee Lowridge was the color artist. Clayton Cowles was the letterer. Neil Uyatake did design and production. Heather Antos was the senior editor, and Vanessa Real was the editorial assistant. And the opening text was, "Across the galaxy, godlike aliens are being destroyed. Starfleet Captain Benjamin Sisko, emissary to the godlike Bajoran prophets, has assembled a crew of legends to discover this murderer and stop them. Recent evidence has revealed that a group of rogue Klingons may be responsible, but the trail has gone cold, and Sisko has been changed by his time among the gods. How can he hope to understand this horrible crime if he cannot first understand himself?" Ensign Talir wakes up in his quarters aboard the Theseus and repeats to himself, "I am Talir, a Vulcan of Starfleet," as he prepares for his duties. A glimpse at his personnel file reveals that he has been subject to disciplinary action following a posting at Starbase 1. Although the details of that incident are classified, he was recruited by Captain Scott from corrective duty. Next, we see Dr. Crusher having a conversation with Captain Sisko about his time spent living with the superphysical Bajoran prophets. The conversation concludes with the doctor asking the captain if he or his son knows whether or not he is truly human. We then see Jake Sisko cooking a gumbo dish inspired by his late grandfather's recipe. Jake is describing the process to Talir and asks the Vulcan, "Anyone ever tell you remind them of Mr. Spock?" Talir replies, "Frequently." And then the Vulcan experiences a feeling that something is awry. Talir attempts to contact the bridge, but they are unable to respond due to a cattle stampede. Captain Sisko is also unable to contact the bridge, and it is apparent that there is some extra-normal phenomenon that is affecting reality aboard the ship. Sisko then taps into his latent connection to the prophets and realizes what is really responsible for the shifts in reality. It is that pesky super being known as Q. Q then appears to Sisko, who responds by knocking the super being on his ass with a right cross. Sisko demands to know why Q is present on the ship, but the conversation is interrupted by a message from Captain Scott from the engineering section, who says that the ship's warp core is becoming a singularity, such as at the center of a black whole. Jake then is also able to contact his father, and then Captain Sisko asks how they kick a god off their starship. Ensign Talir points out that several supernormal civilizations, like the Q continuum, are made up of extra-dimensional tachyons, and then Captain Scott says he will bring up a deflector program, but Talir will need to get down to control and plug it in. Talir and Jake then make their way to the deflector control deck, and when they arrive, Talir says, "Jake Sisko, you previously noted my similarity to the famed Ambassador Spock. This is not a coincidence. I encountered Spock when I was a child. I saw him in everything noble in this universe. When faced with overwhelming problems like those faced today, Spock's example leaves me no option but to put the needs of the few above the needs of the many. For I am Talir, a Vulcan of Starfleet." Talir then completes the installation of Scotty's deflector program, and then Q appears to Sisko and admits that of all the supernormal civilizations, such as the Q Continuum and the Bajoran Prophets, it had to be Sisko that was chosen to save all of them from the deicital menace preying on the galaxy. But, Q thinks, maybe the Prophets have decent taste. Before Q leaves, he tells Sisko to seek out the god city of Takan and don't dare let them down. Sisko then confirms that everything is all right with the ship and its crew, then turns command over to Commander Data, and then resumes his conversation with Dr. Crusher. Later, as Ben enjoys the gumbo Jake has prepared, Talir looks in a mirror and says to himself, I am Talir. I am Talir, a Vulcan Starfleet. Once again, many covers for this issue. Cover A, the pencil and ink art was by Ramon Rosales and color art by Lee Lowridge. The image shows the skeleton face of Q behind an image of the Theseus. An intriguing enough image, and this one is my favorite. And for cover B, the pencil, ink, and colors were by Angel Onzueta. The image shows a giant humanoid version of Q in front of a smaller version of Sisko. For cover C, the pencil, ink, and color art was by Liana Kangas, a psychedelic image of Worf and Dr. Crusher. Cover D, the retailer incentive, was the same version as cover A, but no color. The cover E was also a retailer incentive, pencil, ink, and color art by Stefano Simeone, an MC Escher-esque visual of Sisko trapped in a mirror scenario. Cover F was also a retailer incentive, with the same image as cover E, but with no trade dress. Now, I don't have as much to say about this issue as I have about previous issues. Overall, I prefer the art of Ramon Rosales to Joe Eisma, who penciled most of this issue. Many of the characters look less like the actors who portrayed them than I have ever seen before. For example, when Q donned the uniform of a Theseus crew member, I thought it was actually Tom Paris. The only way I could tell it was Q, apart from the dialogue, was by the captain's insignia that Q always uses when he wears a Starfleet uniform. Speaking of Starfleet uniforms, I don't think I've commented yet about the design of the Theseus uniforms. This story arc, the relaunched Star Trek series, is the first time I have seen these designs, and I don't know if they've ever been used before. But as is often the tradition on Star Trek series, each series often will have a slightly different design for the uniforms. I do like them, but I'm not sure who should receive credit for designing them. My guess would be Ramon Rosales, since he penciled and inked the first issue, but that is a guess. Now, we do get to see more of Jake in this issue. I recall on the episode of the podcast, Comic Book Couples Counseling, where they interviewed writers Jackson Lanzing and Collin Kelly about this series, the co-host of the podcast, Lisa Gullickson, made the observation that of all of the live-action captains we have seen in Star Trek, Sisko was the only one who was a full-time father.
Yes, Jim Kirk sired David Marcus, but Kirk was not in David's life, and David never even knew that Kirk was his biological parent. Sulu had a daughter, but she was so little a part of his life that Kirk didn't even know that Sulu was a parent. Now, on the animated Lower Decks series, the main character, Beckett Mariner, is the daughter of her ship's captain, which is why I had to throw in the qualifier of live action. Now, getting back to Jake and Ben Sisko, their relationship was a fundamental part of their characters. And now that Sisko has experienced godhood and returned to humanity, it is the bond that Ben has with Jake that is his most important tether to people, even more so than his wife or their daughter. Back in the first issue, the first word that Sisko spoke when he returned to live with the humans was Jake. There is a 2-page spread in the middle of the book that has almost no connection to the story. We do see Lily Sato in cowboy clothing on horseback, but the rendering is so poor that we can't really make out any of the other characters. The scene appears to take place on an open plain, but since Talir tried to contact the bridge just before this image, I guess that the cattle stampede is on the bridge, where Lily would be. We then see that the cattle is stampeding in what is clearly the ship's corridor, but this time Lily is wearing her Starfleet uniform. The image of Sisko manifesting his connection to the supernormal energy given to him by the prophets is unusual, like an energy form, and I do not ever recall seeing his connection to that energy portrayed this way before. On Q's personnel entry, we see indications of Q's visits to Captains Picard, Janeway, and Sisko, all of which we saw on their television series. But we also see that Q has made 7 visits to Captain Dolan Prem of the USS London. This was the first mention ever of Captain Prem, and in the 7 months since the issue was published, there are multiple articles and fanfic postings about this character. So I thought that was a very nice touch. I mean, this character wasn't even seen. He was just mentioned 7 months ago, and already, there's all kinds of stuff about him on the internet. Now, throughout Star Trek, there have been appearances by several godlike beings, such as the Prophets, the Q Continuum, Gary Mitchell, the crystalline entities, etc. I've been referring to these as supernormal beings, as the term superhuman usually refers to superheroes, and of course, a lot of these aren't even humanoid, but that is not what this is. Now, in this issue, Talir refers to them as Kardashev high civilizations. Now, it is also said on Talir's personnel page that he's an expert on extra-dimensional tachyons. And now, later in the issue, it says that the Kardashev high civilizations often have extra-dimensional tachyons in their composition. So, is that why Scotty chose him long before Sisko returned to our plane of existence? Guess we'll have to wait and see. Now, as Talir and Jake make their way through the ship, they encounter musketeers, an octopus, ballroom dancing. We see Jim Kirk at the signing of the Organian Peace Treaty, and thousands of tribbles. And the issue concludes with Talir transitioning from "I am Talir, a Vulcan of Starfleet," to "I am Talir, a Vulcan Starfleet." So, no of. So, will we be seeing a Vulcan Starfleet soon? My final comment is that I just noticed that this issue decreased in page count from 32 to 28 pages. Now, if you include the cover, there's 32, but on most comics, it's 32 pages plus the cover. So whereas this one, it's 28 pages plus the cover. And I don't think I've ever seen a 28-page comic before. All comics I have seen up to now have been in multiples of 8 pages. It only gets up to 32 pages if you count the covers. So Now this issue, issue 3, the story didn't seem to be as have as dense a narrative as issue 2. That's why I spent more time on the issue 2 synopsis and on the issue 2 page-by-page breakdown. This issue, the story we were given and the approach they took to it made me take a slightly different approach when covering it. You know, if you've watched previous episodes, you see I do that before. Sometimes I tailor my approach to covering the given comic based on what I find within. So I apologize for the delay in episodes. Life has been crazy lately. I'll probably talk more about it in the future, but right now I just want to get this recorded and edited to you as soon as possible. Just remember, my previous episodes are available for your viewing and listening pleasure, such as episode 20, where I covered Star Trek #1 from IDW, the 2022 version, and episode 21, where I talked about both 2022's Justice Society of America #1 and 2022's Stargirl: The Lost Children #1. Please join me for my next episode, where I will cover both 2023's Justice Society of America #2 and 2022's Stargirl: The Lost Children #2. And please join me for the following episode, where I will talk about both 2023's Star Trek #4 and #5. Please click like, please click subscribe, and keep on Justice Trekking.